Hello! If it's hard to know how polygonal masonry got invented, it's even harder to explain how is it forgotten. All around the world we can find ruins of this incredible construction technique that, on top of appearing out of nowhere, sometimes achieving results we cannot replicate today, it ends up disappearing back into nothing for no particular reason, like some sort of double magic trick. This double illusion, the appearing then disappearing stone technology, is quite impressive in many megalithic locations around the world, and none made it better than Punku in Tiwanaku, Bolivia. Punku is an ancient building, said to be from the 8th or 9th century AD, featuring some of the most magical stone shaping technique ever exhibited. The not so famous as they should be H blocks in Punku are carved from a very hard andesite rock, shaped and polished to perfection, in a way that none of the visitors of the site over the past 1,000 years could understand how it was done, raising two typical questions for polygonal sites. How did they do it, and why did they stop doing it? First, let's clarify what it means when polygonal masonry is invented and then forgotten. This happens because ashlar masonry, the conventionally squared stone blocks, plus the usage of mortar to glue them together, is a technique that is both older and younger than polygonal masonry. For example, in Greece we have Knossos from the 20th century BC and the Parthenon from the 3rd century BC, both made with square blocks. But bang in the middle of them there is polygonal Mycenae at 14 BC. The same goes for Peru, where sites like Chavin are from 10 BC and Zanya from 17 AD. Those are made with typical mortar and square blocks, but in the meantime they had Cusco that is crazy polygonal. This appearing then disappearing trick works even if we believe polygonal masonry to be older than it is conventionally dated, including from before the flood. For this act, it doesn't matter if polygonal masonry is 2000 years old, as most academics will say, or 12,000 years old, as some people believe, because traditional ashlar with mortar will still be both younger and older than that. The first brick and mortar buildings could be as old as man, 100,000 years old. Wherever and whenever polygonal masonry shows up, beforehand there was some ashlar plus mortar sort of hut. Later they moved into this fancy polygonal with odd-shaped stones set together without mortar. And finally, for apparently no good reason, polygonal stops, going back to the simpler ashlar and mortar constructions. Which is surprising, at least. It seems to be an evolution, followed by a devolution, repeating itself all around the world, enabling all sorts of magical explanations. Academics tend to simplify the reasons for the polygonal disappearing act by engaging in contradictions regarding big chunks of the stone evidence, as presented by some ruins around the world. For example, if, as they say, the collapse of the Bronze Age in Europe is the reason to abandon Cyclopean masonry in Mycenae, then it would also mean that a lot of the Greek sites like Cassiope are 1,000 years older than what they are currently being dated. Which is probably true, but that's in another continent. In In South America, the Spaniards are blamed for vanishing with the Inca civilization, including the amazing polygonal walls. However, there is this small place called Machu Picchu, probably you've heard of it already, that was abandoned before the Spanish arrival. So, whatever was going on up there had nothing to do with the conquistadors and was all about how the Incas run their show. Surprisingly or not, what the Incas were performing in Machu Picchu was that same old disappearing act, whereas rubble or cheap stonework is placed on top of many fine polygonal constructions, not just in one place, but in a bunch of buildings over there. The finer shapes are underneath cheaper ones, thus proving that even before the Spanish arrival, the Inca had already devolved. They abandoned or lost that amazing technique to build polygonal walls. And then there's the case in point, Tiwanaku, that had a fine empire going on, extending beyond what is today Bolivia, with deserved stonemasonry fame, after carving the unbelievable H blocks. Nevertheless, they stopped doing it, making their unique rock carving technique disappear, for no good reason that we know of. Prior to guessing why polygonal technology magically comes and goes, is invented and then forgotten, we'll need to debunk two academic wrong assumptions about the building technique. Number 1. Polygonal masonry is way harder to build than ashlar, those squared blocks with mortar. Polygonal requires massive amounts of work, so there is no saving of time building it. It's not about being efficient in any way. Polygonal walls are so time-consuming that they cannot be built under the pressure of a deadline. Meaning, if one is building ashlar in a rush, they can have two teams cutting stone instead of just one, and produce those same stones in half the time. But in polygonal masonry, a new stone can only be shaped after the previous one is set into place. Thus, polygonal building is a bit like that saying that 9 women cannot make a baby in 1 month. Wrong assumption number 2. Polygonal is better quality but only in the long run. It takes more time to build and accomplishes the same result, apparently and at first sight. Only after an earthquake or a flood does it become apparent that the investment of time in making a polygonal wall has a payout. Not for nothing, the Spanish have this saying, cheap will be expensive, probably about the crappy work they have done in Latin America. Moving on with the show. What we have at center stage is a mysterious sequence, whereas early tribes would build with ashlar and mortar, because it's easy. Then something changes and they move into expensive and durable polygonal masonry. Then something changes again and they go back to build with fast and efficient but less durable ashlar and mortar. Here's my guess on why or how I think it would go with a view to Tiwanaku. The beginning. At first, societies are basic and cannot afford the extra cost of polygonal masonry. They build the rough and simple buildings as the earth mounds we can find in Tiwanaku, covered in soft red sandstone. That is clearly not sophisticated nor resistant. With time and natural disasters like earthquakes or floods, the small duration of those unremarkable buildings is exposed. The top. Then some long, peaceful and prosperous period emerges, and people, ruling people, start thinking long term, realizing that to leave an heritage for the millennia, they have to improve their building technique. This happens at a time when the ruling class is not limited in their capability to expend ungodly amounts of manpower on vanity projects. Things like Puma Punku and the outrageously complex H blocks get built just because they can. Such a period is also stable enough for commerce to expand and know-how to be exchanged. The demise. Finally, the living standards of the population base rises with the introduction of new productive tools, or alternatively when a new danger emerges, both questioning the authority of the ruler, both flattening the gap between the leader and the populace. With those changes in a faster moving society, with sort of an emerging upper middle class competing for power, efficiency is again paramount. In Tiwanaku case, the ultimate cause for the demise could be the expansion to a bunch of new colonies or allied cities in the region, all of them with commercial ties to the capital, but none with anything like the stones of Punku. Note that in Tiwanaku, the elusive stonemasonry skill that produced the H blocks disappears at around the year 1000 AD, right at the top of their culture, but without any sign of a major crisis. Quite the contrary. Apparently, the Tiwanaku were doing just fine when they stopped building those crazy stone bricks. Their main source of wealth, a clever system of irrigation and suspended crops, something like hydroponic agriculture but way back then, remained productive for a few centuries after Punku was left to decay. So, how come? How can a rise in general prosperity coincide with the demise of polygonal masonry? In my view, polygonal masonry exists in a sweet spot, when the ruling class are like gods, concentrating massive power onto themselves, and the population is fed but not too comfortable, neither in stress, thus enabling the usage of monstrous amounts of resources in vanity projects like the pyramids of Giza or Obamacare. Those megalomaniac projects cannot exist in the early days of a society, because they are dirt poor and cannot afford to build polygonal walls nor anything as gloriously wasteful. And it cannot continue to exist in a more modern world, with a diverse society, where there is some sort of upper middle class aspiring for power. That Cyclopean sweet spot of some wealth but massive inequality is also visible in writing, or the lack of it. Many of the Cyclopean sites are pre-writing, adding to the mystery of how they come up with the stonemasonry skill, but not of how do they lost it. Having no writing fits with the having just a small number of people with all the knowledge and power, talking to themselves instead of writing down their secrets to be read by who knows who. However, it also means that as soon as those big shots get into personal trouble, their know-how is lost. So, was this reduction of the gap between the rulers and the ruled the reason for Tiwanaku to stop building their fancy stone structures? Well, we just don't know, but it fits. The fancy stonework we can see in the H blocks disappears ahead of the Tiwanaku state getting into real trouble. Or better said, the bizarre and expensive projects like Punku are the first instrument to stop, some time before the whole music ends. Meaning, it's the beginning of the end. It's when a society is no longer capable of complex stuff the way they were used to, and make embarrassing mistakes, like the sand pyramids at Saqqara or the Obamacare website. In summary, an expanding wealth gap is revealed by new vanity projects. The leaders take credit for whatever wealth was created in the past and splash their names into all sorts of megalomaniac megaliths. Then, the narcissism of the leaders lead to their own demise. People would be lucky if the gap is reduced by an increase of the living standards at the base. with upcoming people preferring to invest in their personal comfort instead of the glorification of the ruler. But sadly, most times it goes down in a bad way, when the mega projects are left unfinished because the rulers are now too busy crushing the mood with wars and taxes. This theory of the expanding and contracting wealth gap might explain why polygonal masonry comes and goes. Well, mostly how it goes, as it does not explain how the know-how is acquired, nor communicated, or even how old it is. Those are a lot of questions for future videos, and I have no idea where to go next, so let me know in the comments which way do you prefer. See you around!